Good evening. My name is Ryan Benegali, and I'm an assistant professor of music here in the Colorado College Music Department. And welcome to what I hope is the first in a series of talks on American music here at Colorado College. Not the first, but the first of an ongoing series, hopefully. Before I introduce tonight's distinguished speaker, I'd like to let you know about a special music department concert showcase that's taking place here in Packard Hall tomorrow at 3 p.m. This is in celebration of homecoming. This concert is going to feature our gamelan, bluegrass, and bowed piano ensembles, as well as individual performances by some of our most talented students and faculty. So that's 3 p.m. here in Packard Hall tomorrow. Here tonight, through the generous support of the Venture Grant Visiting Faculty Fund administered by the Dean's Office, I'm delighted to welcome American music scholar Dr. Sheryl Kaskowitz. Sheryl Kaskowitz is the product of a liberal arts music program herself, and if one doesn't attend Colorado College, I suppose that Oberlin would fit the bill just fine. She carried out her graduate work at Harvard University, earning her master's and PhD in music with an emphasis in ethnomusicology. Her dissertation was titled, As we Raise Our Voices, A Social History and Ethnography of God Bless America, and it received the Wiley Housewright Dissertation Award from the Society for American Music. And this highly coveted prize acknowledges the single best PhD thesis in American music in a given year. So it's little surprise that Oxford University Press leaped at the chance to publish her scholarship. And the result is this book, God Bless America, The Surprising History of an Iconic Song. It's garnered the sort of media attention not typically received by an academic book. Reviews have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Christian Science Monitor, Huffington Post, and even Parade magazine. Signed copies of the book are available for purchase outside here following the talk this evening. And of course I could go on all night about Sheryl Kaskowitz and her distinguished work, but you aren't here to hear me. So let's get on with it. It is my distinct pleasure and honor to welcome to the stage an incredible scholar, colleague, and friend, Dr. Sheryl Kaskowitz.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for coming, and thanks to Ryan and the Colorado College Music Department for having me here. It's a real honor. I don't remember when I first learned God Bless America. I think maybe it was in fourth grade chorus. I can sort of imagine that it would have been in that songbook, somewhere in between Don't Fence Me In and This Land Is Your Land. It may have been earlier. It's just a song that I just know. But I do remember when I first became aware of the song's symbolic power. It was 1991, and my high school choir was rehearsing for our spring Broadway review. We were set to perform a medley of Irving Berlin's songs, ending triumphantly with God Bless America. This was during the final months of the first Iraq War, and as we rehearsed that winter, a friend of mine complained that he didn't think we should sing the song, that it represented blind patriotism and support for the administration in the war. I didn't have any of those associations with the song. For me, it was a holdover from childhood, a little hokey maybe, but harmless. But I decided to bring my friend's concerns to our choir director, and she told me that for her, God Bless America was simply one of Berlin's most beloved and well-known songs, and that it needed to be included in our tribute to him as a composer. And that was the end of the story. My friend and I can't remember what happened when we performed it that spring, if he staged an angry protest by walking off the stage, or if he stood silently or grumbled his way through it. The experience has joined my first encounter with the song, both now faded from memory. I gave God Bless America very little thought until 10 years later, when I sat glued to the television along with millions of others on September 11th, 2001, as members of Congress held a press conference on the steps of the Capitol. And I'll just show you a bit of that. It's Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, who's talking at this point.
We also remember those thousands of people who are rescue workers. We'd ask now that we all bow our heads in a moment of silence and remembrance. Thank you.
it seems clear that this singing was a sincere and spontaneous response to the tragedy, without a calculated purpose as one might imagine in that political context. And this press conference performance seems to have anointed the singing of God Bless America as the appropriate vehicle for group mourning and commemoration of the attacks. It became the song of choice at 9/11 memorials, both official and ad hoc, sung at spontaneous memorial sites in Manhattan and beyond. In the week after the attacks, many newspapers took note of this phenomenon, with headlines that proclaimed God Bless America the #1 anthem, or the song in a nation's heart, or a balm for the nation's grief. The song came to symbolize remembrance and commemoration as people returned to their normal lives, marking the resumption of everyday activities. When Broadway shows reopened on September 13th, audiences joined in singing God Bless America after the final curtain. Stock traders sang along as it was performed at the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange on September 17th. And that same day, baseball fans sang it at stadiums across the country as professional games resumed. And this is where I encountered the song again, a few weeks after 9/11, when I stood and sang it along with the rest of the crowd during the 7th inning stretch at a San Francisco Giants game. I've always loved the 7th inning stretch, when the stands are transformed into an impromptu choir, standing together to sing that anthem of fan allegiance, "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." And so I was struck by this new addition to my beloved baseball sing-along, moved by the crowd's enthusiastic response in the fall of 2001, intrigued as the song appeared to once again take up the mantle of support for a second Bush administration and its own war in Iraq beginning in 2003, fascinated as the song became a lasting part of the baseball ritual long after 9/11. My high school experience with God Bless America made me aware of the song's complicated power, and I wanted to understand the meanings underlying these moments. How did this simple melody come to inhabit our collective American consciousness? And how might its meaning have shifted over time? The ethnomusicologist Tom Torino calls this process semantic snowballing. As a song is sung again and again in different contexts over time, new associations are added, while older ones are retained, so that a song becomes more than just its words and melody. It now holds all of this symbolic meaning because of these associations that have accumulated over the course of the song's lifetime. And one thing that's interesting about God Bless America is that its meaning is particularly fluid, so that our associations with it can change from generation to generation. And even within the same time period, the song can mean something different to different people who are standing next to each other and singing it at the same time. If we look at the song's lyrics, we can see why this is. The words don't reference a particular point of view or a particular time or place. They're vague, and they've allowed God Bless America to embody multiple, sometimes contradictory points of view, with shifting meanings that depend on who is doing the singing and the listening. Who is the I in land that I love? Who is claiming America as my home sweet home? What hardship is signified by the night? And in what direction does the country need to be guided? Whose God is being invoked? So over time, God Bless America has taken on these different meanings depending on the social and historical context in which it's sung. And this shape-shifting ability has made it a powerful and surprisingly complex symbol for such a simple patriotic tune. So tonight, I'd like to explore some of these twists and turns in the song's meaning, first examining the song's shifting relationship to war, and then looking at changes in its political meanings and associations. If you watched the World Series in 2011, you may have noticed a trend in the nightly performances of God Bless America during the 7th inning stretch. At 5 of the 7 games of the series, the song was performed by a soldier in uniform.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies to the ocean. my home, sweet home.
So God Bless America was originally added to the seventh inning stretch as a way to commemorate the September 11th attacks. But since 2003, the song has increasingly become a sonic symbol of support for the troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. And this is just the most recent incarnation of the song's longtime association with war. The song's use as an anthem in support of military action goes back to 1940, when it was embraced by the public as an interventionist anthem, continually sung at rallies in support of American involvement in the escalating conflict in Europe. Radio star Kate Smith, who first performed God Bless America and retained it as a signature song, became the quintessential voice of the home front during the war. She mounted elaborate stage shows at North American military bases and became known for the 13-hour marathon war bond drives that she held on the radio. Smith's association with God Bless America essentially created and reinforced her patriotic image, and her wartime use of the song in turn solidified its role as a signifier for home front support for war, a connection that would continue into the 21st century. But I'd just like to stop and think for a minute. Why did God Bless America take on this strong association with interventionism in the first place? There's no martial imagery in the lyrics of the song's familiar chorus that specifically link it to war. No bombs bursting in air, or land where my fathers died, or terrible swift swords like there are in other patriotic songs. So how did this patriotic song become the anthem of choice for military supporters, rather than another? In fact, the early history of God Bless America reveals a shifting relationship with war. It was originally written during World War I for soldiers to sing, but took on a very different meaning during the period directly before the US entry into World War II, when changes made by Irving Berlin first aligned it with isolationism, before positioning it to become a song in support of the war. And these shifting associations reflect larger changes in public opinion about American involvement in the war over the course of the 20th century. So Irving Berlin first composed God Bless America in 1918, when he was serving in the Army and stationed at Camp Upton in Yaphank, New York. While there, he wrote an all-soldier review as a fundraiser for the camp, which was called Yip Yip Yaphank. The show featured satirical spoofs of Army life, including the now well-known Oh How I Hate to Get Up in the Morning, and boisterous Ziegfeld Follies-style dance numbers with male soldiers in drag. One reviewer characterized the show as one long laugh. Berlin originally wrote God Bless America as the show's finale, but ultimately decided not to include it. And certainly looking at these images, one can imagine why the more serious God Bless America might not have seemed the right fit for this show. But Berlin later wrote that he felt the song was too obviously patriotic for soldiers to sing, that it was like gilding the lily to have men in uniform performing such an overtly patriotic tune. And of course, it's interesting from our perspective now, this is such stark contrast to our contemporary experience of the song, where a performance by a uniformed service member is used to underscore the song's connection to support for the troops. But back in 1918, Berlin decided to scrap God Bless America. He filed it away in his trunk of rejected songs, where it lay for 20 years until the fall of 1938. After spending time in London that September, he returned home troubled by the growing tensions in Europe. He tried writing a new song to express his feelings of gratitude for the US, but he was not satisfied with his attempts, which had titles like Let's Talk About Liberty and Thanks, America. From his long experience as a songwriter, Berlin knew that a song with such an obvious message stood little chance of catching on. As he proclaimed in an August 1940 interview, quote, "A song to become popular should not establish any new ideas. It must be a means of expression for sentiments already in vogue." That fall, the radio star Kate Smith and her manager Ted Collins asked Berlin for a new patriotic song for Smith to sing for a special Armistice Day radio show. As the story goes, Berlin rediscovered his old song, made changes to it, and gave it to Smith to premiere on her show, which aired on the eve of Armistice Day, November 10th, 1938. And this picture is said to have been taken on the night of the song's premiere. So it's important to note that when Berlin recovered God Bless America from his trunk in 1938, much had changed since he had first sketched his song 20 years earlier. A wartime marked by the zeal of George M. Cohan's Over There had given way to an increasing mood of isolationism during the 1930s. According to one public opinion poll given in 1936, 95% of Americans were opposed to US participation in another European war. When Irving Berlin had returned from London that September, he told a reporter, quote, "I'd like to write a great peace song, a great marching song that would make people march toward peace." Kate Smith expressed similar sentiments on her daytime talk show on the day of the song's premiere, saying, "As I stand before the microphone and sing it with all my heart, I'll be thinking of our veterans, and I'll be praying with every breath I draw that we shall never have another war," unquote. Armistice Day itself, the day of the song's premiere, had only been made a legal holiday in May of 1938, when an act of Congress declared it a day to be dedicated to the cause of world peace. The holiday's name wasn't changed to Veterans Day until 1954. So against this backdrop, it seems clear that God Bless America was originally positioned as an anthem for non-interventionism in the escalating war in Europe. And we can see changes that Irving Berlin made in 1938 that reflect this move away from war. So in the song's original 1918 incarnation, the initial lyrics were appropriate for soldiers to sing during wartime, with the words, "Make her victorious on land and foam," referencing the battlefronts in Europe. The rhythm is in a martial 2/4 time, and the melody features these bugle call leaps in the opening phrase, as well as a reference to Stars and Stripes Forever on the line "to the right with a light from above." A group of singers here at Colorado College was nice enough to record a rendition of this original version of the song, because there is not a recording that currently exists, so that we can get a sense of what it might have sounded like had Irving Berlin not tossed it in the reject pile. So here is Jack Ahern, Drew Campbell, Doran Mitchell, Evan Sauvage, and Philip Ward singing the original 1918 version.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her to the right with a light from above. Make her victorious on land and foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much to our singers for that. So now let's take a look at some of the changes that Berlin made to this original version when he made his revisions in the fall of 1938. So we have, I know it's a little blurry for you, but the original is on top with the revisions below. In that opening line, you can see he elongated note values and eliminated the bugle call leaping melody, creating a smoother line that must have felt more like a ballad suitable for a popular singer like Kate Smith than a march for soldiers to sing. And it also makes it easier to sing, for anyone to sing. He made similar melodic changes to the second line, replacing that leaping reference to Stars and Stripes Forever with stepwise motion. And here he also replaced the words "guide her to the right" with "guide her through the night," because by the 1930s, the term "the right" had acquired a new association with fascism that didn't exist when he originally wrote it in 1918. He completely removed the line "make her victorious on land and foam," which was obviously not appropriate during peacetime, and he instead wrote this new C section with lyrics in praise of the country's natural landscape. At this point, Berlin also added an introductory verse, which was a common practice for popular songs at this time. So we can see in the lyrics, the storm clouds in the first line are an obvious reference to the growing strife in Europe, and they follow pop song conventions that link bad weather to troubled times. But most importantly, from my perspective anyway, this line, "Let us all be grateful that we're far from there," strongly points to a non-interventionist position, one that may have been sympathetic to the suffering in Europe, but that did not urge action to bring Americans into the fray. So let's listen to this verse from a recording of Kate Smith's very first performance on November 10th, 1938.
While the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us swear allegiance to our land that's free. Let us all be grateful that we're far from there.
Kate Smith went on to sing God Bless America on her radio show every week. And she eventually slowed down the tempo so that it had even more of a feeling of a weighty anthem, moving it away from a March for Soldiers to Sing or any kind of upbeat pop ballad. So I can just play, again, just the end of the verse and the first phrase of the chorus from a performance that she did on February 16th, 1939. And so she had been singing this every week since November 10th.
That's free. Let us all be thankful that we're far from there as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above.
So as we can see, at this point, Smith continued to sing the non-interventionist grateful that we're far from there, though here she's actually changed it to thankful that we're far from there, which is a subtle shift, but I think an important one to keep in mind, the difference between grateful for something that you might not have expected versus thankful. It's a small semantic point. But regardless, that line stayed. But when Berlin published the sheet music in March 1939, the line was permanently changed to, "Let us all be grateful for a land so fair." So just 4 months after its debut, God Bless America was no longer a peace song, as it had been positioned to be in the fall of 1938. In fact, later articles and interviews about the song made no mention of the peace message that was present at the song's origins. There are a few reasons behind this shift. One important factor is that the premiere of God Bless America happened to occur the day after Kristallnacht, the Nazis' calculated attacks on Jewish communities in Germany and its annexed territories, which took place on November 9th. According to many scholars of World War II, the brutality of these attacks signaled a turning point for a growing American condemnation of Nazi Germany and a consequent move away from staunch isolationism. Berlin's removal of the "grateful that we're far from there" line was also a reflection of his own changing views as much as to shifts in public opinion. As a Jewish immigrant himself, Berlin showed growing concern about the Nazis' rise in Europe and began to give large donations to Jewish relief work during this period. In her memoir, Berlin's daughter, Mary Ellen Barrett, wrote that by 1940, quote, "Isolationists in our interventionist family became the enemy, or at best, if close friends, the misguided ones," unquote. Berlin himself sang God Bless America at several interventionist rallies. In fact, the song became so strongly associated with support for the war that it was booed at rallies of the conservative isolationist group America First, purportedly because it was regarded as an interventionist song. So, God Bless America began its life as a rousing soldiers' march during World War I, then was briefly reincarnated as a peace song in the fall of 1938, before becoming an interventionist anthem during the years leading up to the US entry into the war. And these changes in meaning during the song's early history reflect broader shifts in public attitudes about American war. Although Berlin scrapped his original lyrics imploring America to be guided to the right, this idea of a rightward shift is actually quite relevant in looking at the changing political meaning of God Bless America. Over time, the song has become increasingly associated with conservative points of view, from an early association with cultural tolerance and religious pluralism to its use as an anthem for the Christian right. The song's association with religious tolerance was present from the beginning. The very first reference to the song in the New York Times makes no mention of its debut on Kate Smith's radio show in November 1938. Instead, the article describes the song's performance at a dinner sponsored by the National Conference of Christians and Jews, where Catholic, Jewish, and Protestant leaders spoke out against the Nazis' doctrine of race and hate and urged Americans not to let it happen here. The article erroneously states that God Bless America had been written especially for the conference, a telling misperception that demonstrated and perhaps perpetuated the song's initial connections with religious tolerance. Irving Berlin was in attendance at this event, showing his own interest in this issue and his willingness to link his song to this cause. And Berlin's presence may also have strengthened the song's tolerance message. Sung from his perspective as a Jewish immigrant, the song's first and last lines, God Bless America, Land That I Love, and God Bless America, My Home Sweet Home, could be interpreted as simultaneously invoking the idea of a shared Judeo-Christian God and a validation of an immigrant's claim to Americanness. Berlin's support for religious pluralism was made explicit when he established the God Bless America Fund in July 1940, through which all of the song's royalties are donated to the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, and this is still true today. The official statement explaining the choice of the fund's beneficiaries explained, quote, "It was felt that the completely non-sectarian work of the Boy and Girl Scouts was calculated to best promote unity of mind and patriotism, two sentiments that are inherent in the song itself." This emphasis on the Scouts' non-sectarianism points to an interest in promoting religious tolerance, and in fact, the internal structure of the fund itself seems designed to send a message. Berlin appointed 3 public figures to serve as the fund's trustees: a Jew, journalist Herbert Bayard Swope, a Catholic, boxer Gene Tunney, and a Protestant, Theodore Roosevelt Jr., a deliberate ecumenical distribution that persists to this day in the fund structure. And a connection with religious pluralism is also related to Berlin's own biography, since his wife Ellen was a Catholic who taught her children what Berlin's daughter described as, quote, her own informal version of the Judeo-Christian tradition, acceptable to my father, interesting to her. Everything made sense. Jewish and Christian holidays, Jewish and Christian relatives, Jewish and Christian friends. On the flip side, the song became a target for anti-Semitic criticism. In 1940, the Ku Klux Klan and domestic Nazi groups called for a boycott of God Bless America because its composer was Jewish. And this attitude was not limited to these extreme groups. In September 1940, a Time magazine article entitled Badgered Ballad commented, quote, "Chief headache that God Bless America has brought on is a wave of snide anti-Semitism directed at composer Berlin," unquote. For those who feared the encroachments of perceived cultural outsiders, there was a sense that a Jewish immigrant like Irving Berlin had no right to call America his home sweet home, or write a song like God Bless America. Of course, criticism of God Bless America came from the left as well, where many hated the song for what they perceived as its overt jingoism and complacency, glossing over the problems of a country that was still hurting from the Great Depression. In fact, Sorry, this is so blurry, but in 1940, Woody Guthrie wrote "This Land is Your Land" as a kind of protest against God Bless America. This is the original sheet music to "This Land is Your Land," and as you can see, the original title was "God Blessed America." Guthrie followed Berlin's lead and that of "America the Beautiful" before him in evoking the beauty of the natural landscape. Guthrie's original refrain, "God blessed America for me," which he of course later changed to "This land was made for you and me," brings the emphasis back to the people, instead of extolling America's virtues and asking God to bless the country as it is. Despite criticism from both the left and the right, in its early years, the chameleon-like lyrics of God Bless America made it a powerful vehicle for a wide range of issues across the political spectrum. The vague "stand beside her and guide her" allowed the song to be imbued with different meanings depending on which direction the singers wanted the country to be guided through the night. In 1940, both FDR and his Republican challenger, Wendell Willkie, adopted God Bless America as their campaign's theme song. And as you can see, they both, this is their, the banners that they used, which are basically identical. The song was so popular that year that the campaigns were willing to forego a unique signature song and slogan in order to connect their candidate with the newly ubiquitous God Bless America. Irving Berlin himself wrote in a July 1940 letter, quote, "No political party has the exclusive rights to the song God Bless America. In our grant to the Republican Party campaign committee for Wendell Willkie, we specifically mentioned the fact that we could not give exclusive rights for a song that is obviously for all Americans." And between 1940 and the early 1960s, it was sung by a diverse range of political constituencies, sung at protests by striking laborers, and here's an example from 1941, anti-communist protesters, there's one from 1949, and civil rights activists early on in the movement. There's an example of it being sung at a march in 1963. But beginning in the mid-1960s, it became more strongly associated with conservative politics. After 1965, I found very few references to its use within the civil rights movement or other social justice protests. Previously malleable lyrics had become fixed, and gone was the song's tolerant subtext. Instead, there emerged a tacit understanding that the song upheld the ideals of the conservative status quo in response to the social movements of the 1960s. God Bless America came into its own as a conservative anthem during the Vietnam War. And one pivotal moment that illustrates the strength of the song's association with support for that war took place in 1966. It was the read-in for peace in Vietnam at New York's Town Hall. During a lull in the proceedings, an off-duty police detective walked onto the stage, seized the microphone, and began to sing God Bless America, urging the silent audience to sing along. A poet participating in the read-in challenged the officer to leave, saying, "What do you think we're here for? We've been hearing that song too long." When the detective asked the crowd if they would let him be heard, members of the crowd shouted, "No, no," and he left the stage. This episode serves as an intriguing counterpoint to 1940, when the conservative America First crowds booed singers who tried to lead God Bless America at isolationist rallies. But in 1940, the song leaders were unaware that the song had become an interventionist anthem, while in 1966, the song's association with a pro-war stance had become clear to all sides. During the late 1960s and early 1970s, God Bless America was often used as a sonic weapon by pro-war activists in conflicts with anti-war protesters, such as a confrontation in 1970, pictured here, in which a pro-administration crowd sang God Bless America at an anti-war group who confronted them with peace signs. And these changes in the political uses of the song highlight a larger shift in the discourse of patriotism between the 1940s and the 1960s. During World War II, the song was used on the home front to represent American domestic values of tolerance and inclusion in the face of Nazi totalitarianism. But within the context of the Vietnam War, the song's use was linked with a claim to the virtue of the United States' conduct in the world at large, a claim that progressives could not support. So those opposed to the war could not bless America's violence in Vietnam, and this shame over the country's conduct meant that the language of patriotism was increasingly ceded to a conservative point of view. With the Vietnam War as a kind of catalyst, God Bless America was increasingly associated with conservatism. In 1967, the song was played on a Memorial Day parade float in Norwalk, Connecticut by the John Birch Society, an extreme right organization whose links to anti-Semitism and intolerance prompted the NAACP and Jewish and disabled veterans groups from withdrawing from the parade in protest. During the same period, the segregationist politician Lester Maddox used the song as a political anthem, often proclaiming that he sang it with all of his heart. This embrace by the far right sits in stark contrast to the anti-Semitism unleashed against God Bless America in the early 1940s. In May 1973, Irving Berlin joined President Nixon and other celebrities in a rendition of God Bless America at a state dinner for POWs recently returned from Vietnam. The evening was full of high-profile entertainers, but as one newspaper account described, quote, "The man who squeezed tears from all the eyes was 88-year-old Irving Berlin. He sang a wheezy, broken version of his World War II classic, God Bless America. The president himself bounded on the stage with Mrs. Nixon to line up with the showbiz folks, including Bob Hope, Jimmy Stewart, John Wayne, and Phyllis Diller, to join a final chorus. We've never had a night like this one at the White House," the president told his guests. Berlin's personal involvement here, isn't this a fabulous picture? And it's signed there to Irving Berlin, God Bless America, God Bless You, Richard Nixon. Berlin's personal involvement at this event illustrate that his own political alliances map the same rightward shift as the song's associations, from Roosevelt in 1940 to Nixon in 1972. After this event, the president wrote to Berlin that singing God Bless America was one of the most memorable moments at the POW dinner, and Berlin responded that it was, quote, "one of the most moving experiences I ever had." Berlin's emotional response underscores another important aspect of the song's history, that for Berlin, the song was meant as a love song to his adopted country. And you can see that sincerity on his face in photographs like this one, as well as in pictures of the composer leading his song from decades earlier. So this is one from 1942. And here's one from 1940. In explaining his decision to cut the song from Yip Yip Yapank, Berlin acknowledged that the words were a little too tender for soldiers to sing, but he said, "I couldn't help it. That's the way I felt. I always write the way I feel." Mary Ellen Barrett sums it up best in describing her own experience with her father's song. She wrote, "After a while, I became aware of negative talk. Not just the crazies who asked what right an immigrant Jew had to call on God to bless America, or a protest artist like Woody Guthrie who would write 'This land is your land' as an ironic comment, but middle-of-the-road columnists and broadcasters who called the song flag-waving, sentimental, jingoistic, simplistic. I didn't understand what they were saying. The song was what it was, but I was troubled. Then one day, at a Boy Scouts rally in the Catskills, I heard my father sing God Bless America. No other singer, not Crosby, not Judy Garland, not Kate Smith herself, or a long procession of opera stars performing it on state occasions, could give it quite that conviction. He meant every word. It was the land he loved. It was his home sweet home. He, the immigrant who had made good, was saying thank you. And even if in later years he and I disagreed sometimes about the way that land did things, when he sang that song, I could not fail to be profoundly moved."
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
This earlier meaning of the song came into high relief for me this summer when the singer Mark Anthony sang God Bless America at the All-Star Game. Mark Anthony was born in New York into a family originally from Puerto Rico, but that didn't stop a racist response against his performance from circulating on Twitter. And here are just a few examples that unfortunately there were a lot to choose from, but these didn't have racial slurs or profanity, so I thought I didn't mind putting them up there. Seeing this xenophobic backlash, I was immediately reminded of a screed against God Bless America that appeared in 1940, where the writer proclaimed, "I do not consider GBA a patriotic song in the sense of expressing the real American attitude toward his country, but consider that it smacks of the how glad I am attitude of the refugee horde." Certainly, this association of God Bless America with Irving Berlin's perspective as an outsider, a Jewish immigrant who had found success and acceptance in the US, has been pretty much lost today. I wonder if those questioning Mark Anthony's right to sing God Bless America would have agreed that an immigrant like Irving Berlin shouldn't have written the song in the first place. So today I've traced some of the twists and turns in the meanings and associations surrounding God Bless America in the 75 years since its debut. Despite the simplicity of its lyrics and melody, the song has a complex history, serving as a lens that reflects changes in American culture over the course of the 20th and 21st centuries, shifting ideas about intervention and war, about assimilation and acceptance of outsiders, about the rise of the ideological right, and about definitions of Americanness itself. Thank you.